Welcome to the video for finishing off the body of the bag for the Quilted Alice Shoulder Bag by Oro Rosa Patterns. Here I have the bottom of our bag, and what we're going to do first to this is add our purse feet, if you have purse feet. In the instructions there are measurements for where to put your feet, and on the wrong side of the bottom piece I have marked 4 dots for my feet placement. So I'm going to install my 4 purse feet right at those dots. Okay, my purse feet are installed, and I covered the back side of the prong and the washer with duct tape, and that will prevent the metal from wearing holes in the liner over time. And the next thing that we're going to do is mark the center of the long edges on the wrong side of the base. Okay. Next, I'm going to bring in one of my main panels, and just like we did for the base, we're going to measure and mark the center of the bottom of the main panel. And we're going to flip the liner panel up and out of the way and place our base right sides together with our main panel, aligning the center mark at the bottom of the main panel with the center mark that we just made on the bottom piece. And we are going to clip that edge in place. At this time, the pattern has you staple instead of clip. I find clipping is sufficient, but if you want to staple, definitely keep that within the seam allowance, just like we did for the zipper panel. Now, at the very beginning of the pattern, we marked these boxes on the bottom piece, and that is going to indicate where we start and stop our stitches as we sew this edge. So we're going to put our needle down right in the corner of our box, and we're going to stitch along this clipped edge, and we're going to stop stitching right at the corner of this box on the other side. So I'll show you what that looks like here. Okay, so we are going to carefully put our needle down right in the corner of that box. And when we backstitch, we don't want to backstitch first, which meaning going backwards, because we don't want to sew into the box. So the inside of the box should never have stitching inside. So I'm going to go forward a couple stitches, then backwards a couple stitches, and that suffices for backstitching. Okay, I'm approaching the other box, and I'm just going to turn my wheel to make sure that my needle lands right in the corner of that box. I'm not stitching into the box, and I'm going to back stitch now. Okay. And I'll show you what that looks like here. So as you can see here, I started right at the corner of the box. I went forward, then back stitched, and then went forward all the way until I hit the corner of this box, and then I back stitched again. Next, we are going to trim away the seam allowance of just the bottom piece. We are not going to trim the main panel. So I'm just putting my scissors right in between those 2 layers, and I'm just trimming the base. So as you can see here, the main panel did not get trimmed, but the base seam allowance did. Next, we are going to lift up this corner of the base, and we're going to trim from the bottom of the main panel up until right before we hit the end of our stitching. And we're trimming only on the main panel, and I'll show you that once I've done it. So right here on the edge of the main panel, and just trimming right up to that stitch line but I didn't cut any of the stitches. So just up until we hit that stitch line, and we're going to do that on both sides. So I'm lifting the corner of the bottom piece and I'm just getting my scissors right underneath that layer and trimming just before I hit the stitches. And now we can fold the bottom piece down so that we can top stitch it. And we are going to top stitch through the base and through the seam allowance. So the seam allowance should be pointing down and the base should be folded. And what you want to do over here is fold under the main panel just enough to keep it out of the way. And that snip that we did in the last step is going to allow the middle portion of the main panel to remain pointing down, while this portion of the bottom edge is folded under. So that snip allows you to fold that under there. We're going to do the same thing on this side, just fold it under and clip it out of the way. Now we are going to top stitch the base starting approximately 3/8 of an inch away from this side edge and stopping approximately 3/8 of an inch away from this side edge. And for me, it's easiest if I place a mark where I want to start and stop. So basically, I'm just looking at where my stitching is and I place a mark right there. That's where I started and stopped my stitching on this side. So again, right here is the mark where I started and stopped my stitching on that side. So just a little thing to help me out as I'm top stitching this edge, and I'm going to make sure that the seam allowance continues to point down. Now, before I begin top stitching, I am going to pull long tails of thread from my needle, and I am not going to back stitch here. Okay, I'm approaching that mark that we made, and I'm going to lift my needle and pull long tails of thread again. Because we didn't backstitch at the start and stop of this line of top stitching, we are going to pull these threads to the back and tie them off. So turn this over and tug on the thread that's on the back side, and that will cause the thread from the front to kind of loop, and then you can pull it to the back. So now both long threads are at the back and we can tie that off. And I like to do 3 knots here. And I also don't like to cut these too close to the knot so that they don't unravel over time. So there's a little bit of a tail left there. Okay, this one, tug on that back thread and the front thread loops so you can now pull it to the back side and tie that off. Okay, and we are going to repeat all of these steps to connect the other side of the base to the other main panel. All right, both of our main exterior panels are now connected to our bottom piece and they are top stitched down the long edges. The next thing that we're going to do is sew up the sides of the exterior of the bag. So I'm going to fold the 2 main panels right sides together, and the base is going to bend a little bit like this, but we're going to align the side edges of the 2 exterior panels. Now when you're doing this, if you have the quilted version like I do, you want to make sure that you're lining these up in a way where your quilting lines meet up. So be very careful about how you clip these together, making sure that your quilting lines line up, and you want to make sure that they line up not just on the very edge of the bag, but also about a ½ inch in, because your seam allowance is going to be 3/8 of an inch right here. So if they line up right at the edge, but they don't line up 3/8 of an inch into the bag, then the lines will be offset from each other. So I'm going to make sure I curl this back and really take a look and make sure that they're even farther into the bag than just the very edge. And give that a clip. I'm also clipping the bottom edge to keep that in line as well. Okay. And there's a lot of bag here that you are going to need to push out of the way, like all of the liners for now need to be just kind of pushed up above the bag. So just kind of work that so it gets out of your way. All right, so those are clipped together, and I'm just going to sew that really quick just to ensure nothing shifts before I move on to clipping the other side. All right, that side is sewn, and I am going to move on to clipping this side as well. Okay, now that both of the sides of our main panels are stitched, I'm just going to trim down the seam allowance by about half. And this side as well. All right, and next up we are going to stitch the sides to the base. So we're going to kind of open this up and we're going to align the side of the base with the bottom of the main panel and just clip these in place. I like to open up this side seam here so that it's flat. And start clipping like this. Okay, so the side of our base is now clipped to the bottom of the main panel, and I'm going to do the other side now. And there we go. And we are now going to stitch across this edge. Again, you are totally free to staple this edge if you would like. And we are going to stitch that. So I like to put my hand inside the bag and sort of spread my fingers on the hand inside the bag so that this side gets pushed out and this side gets pushed out. And that way when I put this side seam down against my machine like this, I can push the base backwards like that, and then the sides of the bag go kind of spread out like that. And that way you're not going to catch any of the side panel in the stitch as you get close to the corner here. So make sure the sides of the bag are spread out like this. And we are going to just stitch this edge at our regular seam allowance. All right, and I'm going to turn that over and do the same thing to the other side. Okay, remove your staples if you used staples, and we are going to trim this seam allowance down by about half. And again on this side. All right, we are now going to flip this over and clip the sides of the main panel linings together, right sides together. And you'll have to straighten out the top edges that kind of stick up here. All right, and I'm going to do the other side. All right. And we are going to sew down these edges at our regular seam allowance. Okay, we are going to keep the bottom of the main panel linings open for now, completely open. We're not going to stitch these closed until one of the very last steps. So now that these side edges are sewn, we are going to trim that seam allowance down. Okay, now is the time to turn this bag right side out, and it shouldn't be too difficult because we have this huge opening in the liner. So the only real struggle is just going to be turning this right side out, and that's pretty easy to do. All right, I'm going to poke out these corners at the base, the bottom of the bag. And then you also want to reach in the side here and pull these sort of arms out as well. There we go. And we are now going to stuff the liner inside the bag. And you're going to be able to start to see this bag take shape, which is great. All that quilting looks so good. And the base looks really good too. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is close up the bottom of the liner. And the way that we're doing that is we are going to open up the zipper pocket on the inside of the bag, and we're going to reach in and pull out the zipper liner, that zip liner that we did. And then I'm going to reach in through the bottom of the zip liner, that should still be open, and grab the liner of the bag and pull it out through the pocket. So this is going to take just a sec to get it all out of here. And just kind of, just gently so we don't rip any seams or any holes in our cotton. All right, I'm just pulling that out and kind of pushing the zip pocket liner down a little bit so we can have a good look at the bottom of our liner. And I'm just gonna kind of spread it out. And now we've got the two bottom edges of our liner, and we're going to clip those together. Right sides together. Matching the seams from the made side panels. Okay, that is clipped together, and I am now going to stitch along just the bottom of the liner panels. All right, the bottom of our liner is now stitched closed, and we are going to trim off that seam allowance down by about half. Okay. And next we are going to close up the rest of the liner. So there's should be 2 openings, one on either side of the liner. And we're going to spread that open and match the side seam here with the bottom seam of the liner. And that will create your boxed bottom. All right, just like that. And I'm going to do the other side before I stitch these. Just like that. So now I'm going to stitch across these at our regular seam allowance. And trim the seam allowance on this as well. I also backstitched when I went over that center seam a little bit because we are snipping through the stitches when we trim off the seam allowance. So I'm going to turn this over and stitch the other side closed as well. So unfortunately, as I was sewing up the last seam of my boxed bottom, my memory card on my camera filled and my camera stopped filming. So I did miss showing you closing up the zipper pocket. So I'm just going to pull that back out again and show you that once we finished stitching the boxed bottom on the main liners, I trimmed the seam allowance and pushed it back down into the bag, but I kept the zipper pocket pulled out, and then I folded the edges inside so that both of the edges of the open pocket were folded in, and then clipped them together and sewed the bottom of the pocket shut. So this pocket is completely functional now. It's no longer open. And then I pushed it back into its pocket. So pushed it back down in there and got the corners all pushed down so it's nice and flat in there. Okay. All right, we are now going to move on to the final details of the bag.